The amplifier was still humming. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stage at the Monterey County Fairgrounds, drifting upward into the California night like a question nobody could answer yet. Somewhere behind the curtain, a man stood frozen, watching. His name was Pete Townshend, and in about 40 minutes, everything he believed about destruction, about performance, about what it meant to own a stage would collapse in front of 16,000 witnesses. But that story starts earlier, much earlier than the smoke. June 1967. California was the center of the musical universe, and everyone who mattered knew it. The summer of love was not a slogan yet. It was a feeling, an electric charge running through every club, every studio, every conversation between musicians who sensed that the rules of popular music were being rewritten in real time. San Francisco had its psychedelic revolution. Los Angeles had its studio wizards. And into this charged atmosphere, a music promoter named John Phillips and a young producer named Lou Adler decided to do something that had never been attempted before. They would organize an international pop festival. 3 days of music on a scale that made every previous outdoor concert look like a rehearsal. The Monterey International Pop Festival was not supposed to be a competition. The program listed over 30 acts across 3 days, from Ravi Shankar to Otis Redding, from Jefferson Airplane to Simon and Garfunkel. The official spirit was peace, love, and the communal celebration of music as a force for cultural transformation. Every artist was performing for free. The proceeds would go to charity. It was supposed to be a gathering, not a battleground. But backstage, in the narrow corridors between dressing rooms and the wings of the stage, a very different energy was building. And at the center of that energy were 2 acts who understood something the flower children in the audience did not. Performance was war. And on Sunday night, June 18th, the final evening of the festival, the 2 most explosive live acts in rock music were scheduled to perform back-to-back. The Who and the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Neither had broken through in America yet. The Who were massive in England, their singles were anthems, their live shows were legendary for one specific reason. Pete Townshend destroyed his guitar on stage. Every night, he would windmill his arm, slam the instrument into amplifiers, smash it against the floor until it splintered into fragments, while Keith Moon kicked his drum kit into oblivion behind him. It was controlled chaos, a carefully rehearsed explosion that audiences had never seen before. Townshend had turned destruction into theater, and theater into a statement about the violence lurking beneath the surface of polite British society. In England, the Who owned this territory completely. No one else dared to compete on their ground. But there was a problem. And the problem had arrived in Monterey carrying a white Fender Stratocaster and a reputation that was growing faster than anyone could track. Jimi Hendrix had left America as a nobody, a backing musician who had played behind Little Richard, the Isley Brothers, and a string of rhythm and blues acts on the Chitlin circuit. He was talented, everyone who worked with him admitted that, but he was also difficult. He played too loud. He moved too much. He drew attention away from the headliner. One by one, the bandleaders fired him or let him go, and by 1965, Jimmy was playing small clubs in Greenwich Village, barely surviving, waiting for something he could not name. Then Chaz Chandler found him. Chandler, the bassist for the Animals, watched Jimmy play a set at Café Y in New York and understood immediately that he was looking at something unprecedented. He convinced Jimmy to come to London, formed a band around him, and within months, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was the most talked about act in England. The singles came fast. The performances were volcanic. And the word spread across the Atlantic back to the country that had ignored him. Now Monterey was offering both The Who and Hendrix their first major exposure to an American audience. The stakes could not have been higher. Whoever delivered the more unforgettable performance on that Sunday night would own the conversation for weeks, maybe months, maybe forever. And both camps knew it. The tension had been building all weekend. Townshend and Hendrix had met before in London, where they moved in overlapping circles. There was mutual respect, but also mutual wariness. Each understood what the other was capable of. Each understood that Sunday night would be a direct comparison, and comparisons in rock music were never friendly, no matter how many flowers people wore in their hair. The argument started backstage on Sunday afternoon. Neither The Who nor the Jimi Hendrix Experience wanted to perform first. In the logic of live music, the closing act holds the power. The last performance is the one the audience carries home. The last image is the one that burns into memory. Going first meant warming up the crowd for someone else. Going second meant owning the night. According to accounts from people who were present, the discussion was not polite. Townshend was direct, aggressive, certain that The Who deserved the closing slot. Hendrix was quieter but equally firm. His manager, Chas Chandler, argued on his behalf with the intensity of someone who understood that his artist's entire American career might depend on what happened in the next few hours. John Phillips tried to mediate. The festival organizers had not anticipated this level of conflict between two acts who were supposed to represent the cooperative spirit of the event. But cooperation evaporates when careers are on the line, and both sides knew that Monterey was not just a concert. It was an audition in front of the entire American music industry. The solution, when it came, was almost absurdly simple. Someone suggested a coin toss. The fate of two legendary performances, the trajectory of two careers, the memory that 16,000 people would carry for the rest of their lives. All of it came down to a piece of metal spinning in the California air. The Who won the toss, or lost it depending on how you look at what happened next. Pete Townshend chose to go first. The logic seemed sound at the time. Go on, destroy the stage, set the bar so impossibly high that whoever followed would look tame by comparison. The Who had been perfecting their destruction routine for years. They knew exactly how to build a set to its maximum explosive conclusion. They knew how to leave an audience physically shaken. No one, Townshend believed, could follow The Who at full power. No one could top genuine destruction. But there was one detail Townshend had not fully calculated. He had seen Jimi play in London clubs, in relatively contained settings. He had heard the records. He knew Jimi was extraordinary. What he did not know, what no one in Monterey fully understood yet, was what Jimi Hendrix became when the stakes were absolute, when his entire future compressed into a single performance, when the quiet, shy musician from Seattle stopped being a person and became something closer to a force of nature. The Who took the stage as the sun was setting. The light was golden, theatrical, perfect for what they had planned. From the first chord, Townshend attacked. His arm windmilled with violent precision. Roger Daltrey's voice cut through the evening air. Keith Moon played the drums like a man trying to demolish a building from the inside. John Entwistle held the low end together with the calm of someone standing in the eye of a hurricane. They played a tight, devastating set. The music was ferocious. The energy was real. And then came the finale. Townshend smashed his guitar into his amplifier. The feedback screamed. Moon kicked over his drum kit. Smoke bombs detonated on stage, filling the air with thick clouds that turned the scene into something between a rock concert and a battlefield. The audience erupted. 16,000 people who had never seen anything like this roared their approval. It was violent, theatrical, unforgettable. The Who walked off stage knowing they had delivered one of the greatest performances of their career. Backstage, Townshend was sweating, breathing hard, running on adrenaline. He had given everything. The instruments were destroyed. The crowd was still screaming. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Let the American guitar player try to follow that. But something was already shifting in the atmosphere behind the stage. The crew was setting up for the next act with unusual urgency. Roadies moved quickly, their faces carrying an expression that mixed anticipation with something close to nervousness. Word had been circulating all weekend about what Hendrix could do. The crew had watched soundchecks. They had heard things through the walls of dressing rooms. They knew something was coming. The Jimi Hendrix Experience took the stage in front of an audience that was still vibrating from The Who's assault. The crowd was primed for spectacle, already intoxicated by what they had witnessed. Their expectations were at a peak. Anything less than extraordinary would feel like a disappointment after the destruction they had just seen. Jimi walked out carrying his Stratocaster. He was wearing a ruffled shirt, a vest, a headband. He looked calm, almost too calm, considering what was at stake. Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell took their positions. The stage lights shifted, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then Jimi hit the first chord, and the quiet ended permanently. What came out of the amplifiers was not music in any category that the audience had previously understood. It was sound pushed beyond its known boundaries, guitar tones that seemed to originate from some dimension where the instrument had capabilities no manufacturer had ever intended. The volume was immense, but it was not just loud. It was alive. The sound breathed and pulsed and reached into the bodies of 16,000 people and rearranged something fundamental in their understanding of what an electric guitar could communicate. He opened with a version of a song that shredded the original blueprint and rebuilt it as something savage and beautiful and completely new. His fingers moved across the fretboard with a precision that contradicted the wildness of the sound. Every note was controlled. Every burst of feedback was intentional. Every moment of chaos was architecture disguised as abandon. The audience understood immediately that they were witnessing something different from what The Who had delivered. The Who's destruction was physical. Instruments broken, drums toppled, smoke detonated. It was spectacular and visceral, and it operated on the body. What Hendrix was doing operated on a deeper level. He was not destroying his instrument. He was liberating it. He was finding sounds inside the guitar that the guitar itself did not know it contained. Backstage, Pete Townshend had not left. He was standing in the wings, watching, and with every passing minute, his expression changed. The satisfaction from his own performance began to drain away, replaced by something more complex. He was watching a guitarist who could do everything The Who did with destruction, but who added a dimension that Townshend had never considered. Hendrix was not just breaking things. He was creating something in the act of what looked like breaking. The chaos was generative. New sounds emerged from the feedback. New melodies surfaced inside the distortion. Every moment of apparent disorder revealed a hidden order that was more sophisticated than anything Townshend had attempted. The set built relentlessly. Song after song, Hendrix pushed further into territory that no rock performer had explored before in front of an audience this size. He played with his teeth. He played behind his back. He coaxed sounds from his guitar using nothing but controlled feedback and the proximity of the instrument to the amplifier. Each technique that might have seemed like mere showmanship was actually producing music, real harmonic content, not just noise but deliberate sonic choices made in real time at a speed that defied conscious thought. Mitch Mitchell matched him beat for beat, his drumming fluid and responsive, locking into Hendrix's unpredictable shifts with an intuition that came from months of playing together in small London clubs, where the three of them had developed a telepathic musical communication. Noel Redding held the foundation, providing the harmonic anchor that allowed Hendrix to fly as far from conventional structure as he wanted without ever losing the thread entirely. In the audience, musicians who had performed earlier in the festival sat watching with expressions that ranged from amazement to something approaching dread. They were witnessing the arrival of a new standard. After tonight, everything would be measured against what this man could do with 6 strings and an amplifier stack. The bar was not just being raised. It was being relocated to a height that most performers could not even see, let alone reach. And then came the moment that would become the most iconic image in rock history. Hendrix knelt on the stage. He placed his Stratocaster on the ground in front of him. The guitar was still feeding back, the strings still vibrating, the amplifier still pushing sound into the night air. He reached into his pocket and produced a small bottle of lighter fluid. He squeezed it over the guitar's body. The liquid caught the stage lights as it spread across the painted surface. He struck a match. The guitar ignited. Flames rose from the body of the instrument, orange and yellow against the dark stage, and Jimi knelt over it like a priest performing a ritual that existed outside any known religion. He waved his hands over the flames. He coaxed the fire higher. The guitar screamed through the amplifiers as the heat warped the strings and the pickups fed the sound of their own destruction back into the speakers. 16,000 people stopped breathing. This was not The Who's destruction. The Who smashed instruments against the ground, a physical act of violence, dramatic and satisfying in its directness. What Hendrix was doing was something else entirely. He was sacrificing his instrument. He was offering it to something larger than the performance, larger than the audience, larger than the festival itself. The fire was not anger. It was transcendence. It was the moment when a musical instrument stopped being an object and became a symbol for every boundary that could be burned away. Pete Townshend stood in the wings and watched the flames rise. Years later, in interviews, he would describe this moment with an honesty that revealed how deeply it had affected him. He had spent years developing the art of onstage destruction, perfecting the timing, the angles, the maximum dramatic impact of a guitar being smashed. He had believed, with genuine conviction, that no one could match The Who's commitment to demolishing the boundary between performance and chaos. And then he watched a quiet young man from Seattle set a guitar on fire and turn destruction into something The Who had never achieved. Ceremony, ritual, art that transcended its own violence and became, in the space of a few burning seconds, something beautiful. According to accounts from those who were backstage, Townshend did not speak for several minutes after Hendrix's set ended. He stood in the wings as the crowd roared, as the stage crew rushed to clean up the remains of the burned Stratocaster, as the echoes of the performance faded into the Monterey night. When he finally did speak, his words were quiet and directed at no one in particular. The implications rippled outward from that Sunday night in ways that took months and years to fully manifest. The Who continued to be one of the greatest live bands in rock history. Townshend continued to smash guitars on stage for decades. But something had changed in the meaning of that act. After Monterey, after the fire, onstage destruction carried a different weight. Townshend knew it, even if he never fully articulated it in public. The territory he had pioneered had been claimed by someone who understood it more deeply, who had found dimensions in it that Townshend had not imagined. For Hendrix, Monterey was the explosion point. Within weeks, every major publication in the United States was writing about the guitarist who had set his instrument on fire in front of 16,000 people. The image spread through the culture with the speed and intensity of the fire itself. Radio stations that had ignored Hendrix suddenly could not play his records fast enough. Concert promoters who had never heard his name were offering enormous sums for appearances. The unknown musician who had left America as a failed sideman returned as the most talked-about performer in rock music. But the Monterey performance was more than spectacle. Musicians who were there, who watched from the audience or the wings or the backstage corridors, understood that the fire was the least important part of what Hendrix had done. The guitar playing that preceded it, the 40 minutes of sound that built toward that final burning moment, was the real revelation. The fire was the exclamation point. The sentence it concluded was written in notes and feedback and controlled distortion that redefined what the electric guitar could express. The relationship between Townshend and Hendrix after Monterey was complicated in the way that relationships between rivals who respect each other always are. They continued to encounter each other in London and New York. They attended each other's shows. There were moments of genuine warmth and moments of competitive tension. Townshend was too intelligent and too honest to pretend that Monterey had not affected him, and Hendrix was too gracious to ever use the victory as a weapon. What Monterey revealed, beyond the individual performances, was something about the nature of artistic competition itself. The Who's approach to destruction was revolutionary in its time, a genuine innovation that broke rules and shocked audiences and expanded the vocabulary of live rock performance. But it was ultimately physical. Guitars were objects. Smashing them was an act of force. The statement was powerful but finite. Once the instrument was broken, the statement was complete. Hendrix's approach added a dimension that transformed destruction from an ending into a beginning. The fire did not simply end the performance. It elevated it. The burning guitar was not just an object being consumed. It was a symbol being created in real time, a visual metaphor for the way Hendrix's music consumed the boundaries between noise and melody, between control and chaos, between the earthbound limitations of a wooden instrument and the limitless possibilities of pure sound. The months that followed Monterey saw both artists pushing further into their respective visions. The Who recorded ambitious concept albums that channeled Townshend's intellectual ambition into some of the most important works in rock history. Hendrix retreated into the studio, spending hundreds of hours at the record plant in New York, layering sounds, experimenting with techniques that recording engineers had never seen, chasing a sonic vision that lived in his imagination and refused to be captured easily on tape. They crossed paths in London in late 1967 at a club where both happened to be in the audience. According to people who were present, Townshend approached Hendrix, and the conversation that followed was not about competition or Monterey or who had won the Sunday night showdown. It was about songwriting, about the challenge of translating the sounds in your head into recordings that preserved their original power, about the loneliness of being the person in the room who hears music differently from everyone else. There was one moment, according to a journalist who was standing nearby, when Townshend said something to Hendrix that cut through the usual rock star conversation. He said that after Monterey, he had gone back to his hotel room and sat with his guitar for a long time without playing it, just holding it, thinking about what it meant to destroy something you depended on for your livelihood, for your identity, for your voice. He said that watching the fire had made him think about destruction differently, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of faith. You had to believe that something new would rise from the ashes. Otherwise, you were just breaking things. Hendrix listened. He did not respond with advice or philosophy. He simply nodded, in that quiet way he had, the same stillness that had unnerved the session musicians in London a year earlier, the same absorptive silence that made people uncomfortable because it suggested depths they could not measure. The festival itself became a landmark in cultural history, one of the defining events of 1967 and the broader counterculture movement. But for the musicians who were there, particularly for those who performed on that final Sunday night, Monterey was something more personal. It was the night when two different visions of what rock performance could be collided in front of an audience large enough to make the collision matter. The coin that was tossed backstage on that June afternoon decided the order of performance, but it did not decide the outcome. The outcome was decided by what each artist brought to the stage, by the depth of their commitment to their vision, by the years of preparation and instinct and courage that allowed them to deliver, under maximum pressure, performances that would be discussed for decades. Pete Townshend went first and delivered one of the greatest shows of his career. Jimi Hendrix went second and delivered one of the greatest shows in the history of popular music. The difference was not talent or effort or commitment. The difference was that Hendrix found a way to make destruction transcend itself, to make the end of an instrument feel like the beginning of something new. The smoke from the burning Stratocaster drifted upward into the Monterey night and dissolved into the California darkness. But the image it left behind, a young man kneeling over flames, his hands raised like a shaman calling down sound from somewhere beyond the physical world, that image never dissolved. It burned itself into the permanent memory of everyone who witnessed it, and through photographs and film, into the permanent memory of popular culture itself. Sometimes the most important battles are not between enemies. They are between artists who respect each other enough to bring their absolute best, knowing that the audience will be the ultimate judge and that the verdict, once delivered, cannot be appealed. Townshend and Hendrix both brought everything they had to Monterey. What Hendrix brought happened to include fire. And fire, once it starts, changes everything it touches. But the real flame was not the one that consumed the Stratocaster on that June night. The real flame was the one Hendrix lit inside the imagination of every musician who watched, every audience member who witnessed it, every person who would hear the story and understand that music, at its most powerful, is not just sound. It is transformation. And sometimes, to show the world what transformation looks like, you have to be willing to burn the thing you love most and trust that something greater will emerge from the ashes. Pete Townshend kept smashing guitars for the rest of his career. But he never forgot the night when someone showed him that there was a level beyond smashing. A level where destruction and creation became the same act, performed by a quiet man from Seattle who understood, perhaps better than anyone who ever held a guitar, that the instrument was never the point. The sound was never the point. The fire was never the point. The point was what happened in the space between all of them, in that invisible territory where music stops being entertainment and becomes something that no word in any language has ever been able to name.